So, when you're looking at ADHD stimulants, the number of options can feel, well, totally overwhelming. But what if I told you that all those choices, all those different brand names, really just boil down to two core ingredients? Let's dive in and figure out the real difference between the two heavyweights of ADHD treatment, amphetamine and methylphenidate.
I mean, you know the names, right? Adderall, Ritalin, Concerta, Vyvanse. The list just goes on and on. We're talking about more than 30 different brands out there. It's this dizzying list of choices, and each one has its own marketing, its own delivery system. It's no wonder it all gets so confusing. But here's the secret. Behind all that marketing, all those different pills and patches, they are all just different flavors of two, and only two, basic ingredients. It's either an amphetamine or it's a methylphenidate. That's it. And suddenly that confusing landscape gets a whole lot simpler. Okay, so if we're really just choosing between team amphetamine and team methylphenidate, what actually sets them apart? We're going to look at how they work in your brain, how well they work, and maybe most importantly, what the real risks are. To really get this, we've got to go straight into the brain. Specifically, we need to look at how each of these drugs messes with dopamine, that key neurotransmitter for focus and attention, because their approaches are completely different, and that's where this whole story really begins. First up, amphetamine. The best way to think about this one is as an activator. It doesn't just hang around outside the nerve cell. No, it goes right inside and basically pushes this big red button that forces a flood of dopamine out into the synapse. It's a very direct, very powerful move. Methylphenidate, on the other hand, plays a totally different game. It's more like a gatekeeper. It stays outside the cell. And you know how your brain has these tiny little vacuum cleaners that are supposed to suck up leftover dopamine? Well, methylphenidate just comes along and clogs the hose. By blocking that cleanup process, it just lets the dopamine that's already there hang out and work longer. It's way more subtle. So that's it. That's the core mechanical difference right there. Amphetamine gives you a bigger, more direct punch by forcing dopamine out. Methylphenidate gives you a more subtle block, raising dopamine by keeping it from being cleaned up. And that one single distinction, it changes everything. And this leads us straight to our next section, the core trade-off. Because that difference in how they work, the punch versus the block, it creates this fundamental dilemma for doctors and for patients. It's a trade-off between raw power and overall safety.
So if you're looking for pure raw power, well, the data is pretty crystal clear. Study after study, these huge meta-analyses, they all show the same thing. Amphetamines pack a bigger punch. They have a larger effect on ADHD symptoms for both kids and adults. More power, more symptom reduction. Simple as that.
But here's the other side of that coin. Those same massive studies found that methylphenidates are way better tolerated. That means fewer people are reporting those annoying side effects like insomnia, dry mouth, or feeling like a zombie. That subtle block just seems to be a whole lot gentler on the system.
And this quote from psychiatrist Dr. Chris Aiken just nails it. It looks like we are paying a higher price for that greater efficacy. There's just no free lunch here. That extra bit of power you get from amphetamines, it comes at a cost. And that cost is often paid in side effects.
Okay, but common side effects are really just scratching the surface. To understand the real choice here, we have to dig deeper into some of the more serious, though much rarer, psychiatric risks that all this new, large-scale data is starting to uncover.
And this is a big one. A huge study in the New England Journal of Medicine looked at teens and young adults with ADHD. Now, the overall risk of psychosis was pretty low, about 1 in every 660 patients. And this is a big but. The risk was double for people taking amphetamines compared to methylphenidates. That's a difference that's just too big to ignore.
All right, let's start a little scorecard here to keep all this straight. First up, psychosis risk. Amphetamine gets a big red mark for higher risk. Methylphenidate gets a yellow for a lower comparative risk. But we're just getting started. Okay, next up, mania. And this is where the story gets really wild. For decades, when scientists wanted to trigger manic symptoms in lab animals to study things like bipolar disorder, what do you think they used? Yep, amphetamines. Its whole history as this animal model of mania has made the scientific community incredibly nervous about even studying it in humans who have bipolar disorder. So back to the scorecard. For mania risk, amphetamine gets another red mark. It's a clear concern. Methylphenidate, well, it's more complicated. Some data shows a risk, but other studies show no effect at all. So we're just going to call that one mixed data. And then there's this, and it's a pretty stunning finding from a huge analysis.
Researchers looked at suicide risk before and after patients started a stimulant. And for methylphenidate, get this, they saw a 50% drop in the risk of suicide attempts. And amphetamine? Nothing. No change at all.
So let's finish this part of the scorecard. For suicide risk, amphetamine gets a no effect, but methylphenidate gets a green check mark for actually lowering the risk. The picture that's starting to form is pretty clear, right? Higher power with amphetamines, but also a string of higher psychiatric risks.
So you're probably thinking, okay, with all these risks, why on earth are amphetamines so incredibly popular, especially in the US? Well, the answer isn't just in the science. It's in the history, a history that's filled with controversy and some really clever marketing.
Let's do a quick trip back in time. Amphetamines first show up in the 1930s, sold for pretty much everything. By the 60s, abuse was everywhere. This led President Nixon to crack down hard in the 70s, and for about 20 years, almost all stimulant prescriptions switched over to the safer-seeming methylphenidate. And then, bam, 1996, a diet pill gets a makeover, a new name, Adderall, as in ADD for all, and a massive marketing blitz brings amphetamines roaring back. All right, we have gone through the science, the stats, the hidden risks, the history, the whole shebang. So let's pull it all together in this final section to help you and your doctor make a much more informed choice. So here it is, the final scorecard. For pure power, check mark for amphetamine. But for tolerability, how it actually feels to take it, that goes to methylphenidate. Psychosis risk, lower with methylphenidate. For people with other conditions, methylphenidate could even be helpful, while amphetamines are riskier. And finally, there are some animal studies raising concerns about brain toxicity with amphetamines, while some data hints that methylphenidate could even be protective.
So, what's the bottom line here? It's that classic trade-off. Amphetamines give you more power, but they come with more risks. Methylphenidates have a much better safety profile, but they might be a little less potent. There is no single best answer here. The right choice is deeply personal and depends entirely on your health, your history, and what you and your doctor decide is most important.